Good morning, everybody. I want to start by thanking Andrea and Casey and Sarah for the invitation to contribute to this volume. I was jokingly saying to somebody that if you had said to me 20 years ago when I was here that I would be part of such an endeavor for Lisa, I would have said maybe with another word there in the middle. So this is really quite an honor. It also feels very much like a colloquium on steroids, an episode on steroids. So please forgive my nerves. It's been a little while too in terms of presenting in person, so it's really actually fantastic. And I think really poignant for us to be here today. I was saying to David earlier, some of us were here on September 11th. This was the intellectual community that became the place of inquiry and of figuring out what that moment meant for us as theologians. And I can say that it definitely took me in a very different direction than I was intending, and I'm grateful for the professors here that gave space for us to explore that. And I think in some ways some of my work with community organizing is a result of inquiry that happened at this time here at BC. So just wanted to say thank you to that, and then also to Andrea and Autumn for all of the work in pulling us together. So ultimately what I'd like to talk, and also, of course, we need to thank Lisa for being Lisa and for having the impact that you've had on so many of us, and hopefully that's going to be evident over the course of the day. So I want to talk about how I found her ethical framework to be really important for me in doing faith-based community organizing work, that I can show up in organizing as a theological ethicist, as a Christian ethicist, largely because of the work I did here at least at BC, but also with Lisa. So as I did in my essay in the book, I just want to talk a little bit about some of her thought and put that in dialogue with some folks who are in the world of faith-based organizing. And then at the end, I'll just suggest 3 things that perhaps we could talk about in our conversation, some growing edges of Lisa's work. So first, just to begin, I think Lisa provides a great foundation for a framework for community organizing that I have heard from a scholar by the name of Mindy Fullilove, and I was talking about her with Ginny last night. She's got a really fantastic book called Urban Alchemy, Restoring Joy to America's Sorted Out Cities. And I found that book to be really, really helpful, and her as a practitioner to be really, really wise. And one of the things that she said to a group of us at LaSalle when she came and visited, and we took a walk around our neighborhood, I remember this moment very clearly. She said, look around and fall in love with what you see, which sounds very Ignatian and Arupe-esque. But then she said, agitate for your beloved. And I found that to be very compelling. And in Lisa's work, I find the foundations for doing that, especially through her ideas of experience, embodiment, and community. So let me give you a couple ideas of how that could be the case. I think first, she unapologetically claims that our purpose as Christian ethicists is to remain deeply rooted in the story of Christ, but then also be oriented by his vision of the kingdom of God. So it's that combination of being rooted in story, but then oriented by vision that really, I think, resonates in terms of social change movements. And she suggests that the link between the story in which we are rooted and the vision that we have is the imperative to love. To love God, to love as God loves, and essentially with a particular attention to, and dare I say, agitation for the people who are made poor. Not the poor, but I think the people who are made poor. Secondly, for Lisa, theological ethics is public and political. It's public in that it spurs us to risk sharing our unique stories and visions with others in our tradition, but more importantly, to insist on Christianity's contributions to storytelling and dreaming in communities beyond the Christian boundaries. And I think that's what Jim was alluding to towards the end of his paper. The point, Lisa says, is to make, and I quote her, religiously inspired, theologically grounded, practically rooted, yet normatively comprehensive judgments that can break open and cross-cultural and interreligious boundaries and spur moral action. And I think that, again, for folks who are engaged in social change work in our contemporary reality, that is a really important orientation. And I think she has witnessed to this in her own vocational life, right? Working with peace builders and bioethicists, editors on international and regional levels, Catholics seeking a prophetic agenda in American politics, people of various faiths committed to peace and justice. I mean, I think Lisa lives the things that she speaks and writes about. And ultimately, the point of this public and political loving agitation for Lisa is social transformation. That's the point. Transformation of persons, transformations of systems, transformations of communities. At the end of the day, her ethics is deeply relational. So it really isn't just about systems, it is about communities. And that these foundational ideas, I think we can see come into a bit clearer focus if we look at three things in her thoughts that I was invited to reflect on. So I appreciate the invitation. Experience, embodiment, and community. So her feminism anchored in experience. In her 2014 plenary address to the Society of Christian Ethics, Lisa proposes 4 paradigms for Christian feminist ethics. And she identifies herself as operating out of that neo-Thomistic paradigm. And we heard a lot about that last night from Charlie, right? That she provides a linchpin between the neo-pragmatic dimension of her method, in which she acknowledges that the limits of the human capacity to know and do the good are very real. She is a realist. And yet at the same time, she claims a universalist method in which she persists in claiming that truths can be known and acted upon through and not in spite of contextual particularities. So I'm going to quote her here. Unlike Aquinas and most of the Catholic tradition, she notes, contemporary feminist theological ethics must pay more attention to women's concrete experiences of embodiment, to the interdependence of relationships and moral knowledge, and to the perspective of the excluded in deciding what constitutes the common good, end quote. This is a paradigm of feminism I find most appropriate and effective when it comes to contributing to social change movements. I suspect that Lisa would agree with some faith-based organizers who have shaped my work, Salvatierra and Hutzel, who suggest, and I'm going to quote them, that moral authority is at its most powerful when it is wielded together by people who are the most vulnerable in intimate solidarity with those who could easily walk away, end quote. Lisa also warns against a Eurocentric tendency to distance ourselves with intellectualizing or abstracting when we are confronted by others entangled in profound suffering. She regularly endorses the emotional intelligence of empathy, of compassion, of imagination, of memory, of hope. And these things, rather than distance her and all of us from these realities, open her and us up to engagement with thinkers associated with social change movements who recognize the power of emotion in perceiving reality with precision and building trust and endurance for change. For example, Indigenous change leader Eve Tuck notes that intellectualizing about injustice can lead us in the direction of what she calls damage-centered research on communities that are impacted by social injustice. And Tuck suggests that such an approach focuses on individual pain and deprivation rather than on broken systems and structures that cause that pain. And moreover, people within marginalized communities rarely see themselves as damaged. And instead, Tuck suggests a desire-centered approach to research, which focuses instead on the experiential wisdom and tangible hope within a community. Leading with desire turns decision-making power over to the people who are most impacted by injustice. And I think Lisa quite simply gets this, and I want to quote her to you so that you can agree with me, hopefully. To be practically effective, Lisa says, theology and ethical ideas must grip people and communities at more than the intellectual or theological level. Right, so Lisa gets that this doing good, thinking about the good and doing good is not just a work of the head, but it is very much a work of the body and of the heart, of the emotions. Emotional wisdom is not only for those closest to the pain of injustice. Gordon Whitman of the National Interfaith Organizing Network, Faith in Action, suggests that all who seek social change would do well to tap into what he calls, and I quote, the social change superpower of the emotions, in order to stay rooted in our purpose and to attract others to our work. Whitman says, we can use this power not only to shape how we are feeling ourselves, but also shift the emotional state in a room or in a relationship, he says. We can create human environments that make people more open to reflect on their purpose, to learn, to grow, and develop strong and lasting relationships with one another. This makes it possible for people to take risks together. Again, I think Lisa recognizes this. Returning to that warning against intellectualizing, she says, theological and ethical ideals must, quote, have emotional and affective appeal. Ethics is deeply emotional and deeply affective. Lisa's own turn towards desire, imagination, and affection become more evident when we consider the role of embodiment in her method. So let's talk a little bit about that. She contends our embodied selves are socially constructed through interaction with other embodied selves. Our world views may be entrenched in our systems and even in our bodies, but they are also malleable so long as we are actively engaged in ever-expanding circles of what she calls collective belonging. Also, the search for truth is an active correspondence at once individual and collective between knowers and reality to be known, according to Lisa. This exchange happens through embodied investigation and dialogue. In other words, it's our bodies that make universal and global knowing and doing possible. And finally, truth claims have recognizable universal applications with impacts on real embodied people, regardless of our socially constructed differences. Once again, Whitman helps me see the applications of Lisa's insight about the role of embodied knowing for social change movements, which prioritize embodied counters at every stage of social change work. Whitman says, face-to-face experiences help us realize that we're up against other human beings, other created rules, rather than fixed truths. Humanizing systems of oppression can make them easier to dismantle. So let me jump ahead and talk a little bit about her notion of community and the connection to universalism. Lisa is equally preoccupied with the goods of human relationships, which is a fundamental way of saying that she understands the common good. I'm going to quote her here. Inclusive community with other human beings is a constitutive dimension of community with God. Her approach to ethics certainly cultivates the common good through her implicit acknowledgement of the capacity of social capital to affect social change. Relational goods of shared experience, shared story, shared vision, shared norms or strategies, whether among otherwise sordid and distant people or within fractured communities themselves, are both an experience of and a prerequisite for justice. To that end, she falls into what she calls the universal common good ethics paradigm. Moreover, her work is increasingly viable for the intra-religious dimensions of social change work. She insists that knowing and doing the good is best achieved in pluralistic communities, anchored in values, motivated by visions, and achieved through virtuous practice. Effective social change movements would do well to follow her advice and embrace relational goods of inclusiveness, equality, and solidarity by, I quote her, displaying a unity of moral vision, common commitment to redressing of imbalances of power and well-being so that marginal persons, groups, and nature can flourish, end quote. These dialogues and alliances can also be internal, fostering a kind of bonding social capital within fractured communities. For Lisa, echoing the words of social worker to American change movements Brene Brown, the focus is not being right, but getting it right by being authentic to the story of the gospel, especially as it continues to be told and heard in different contexts. This is a particular kind of faithfulness that is more than fidelity to a specific set of moral prescriptions. It fosters fidelity to the tellers and the hearers of stories of life and purpose, whether the gospel or otherwise. So I'm just going to name, and I have, I think, probably 30 seconds. I'm just going to lift up 3 things that I think perhaps we could come back and talk a little bit more about in terms of some growth areas of Lisa's work in this realm of social change. I think the first would be perhaps pressing a little bit or extending a bit her, and this is where it feels very much like colloquium, so you'll have to excuse me, extending her work a bit in thinking about sin as cultural. And I think Brian Massengale at Fordham and his work around the cultural sin of racism, I think could be really helpful in deepening her realism. I think we need to think about the tension between particularities and that universal common good in light of what some of Sean Copeland has done, talking about the wounds of empire, the ongoing wounds of empire in the embodied experience of people today. And then lastly, in terms of some of Lisa's work around reconciliation, I find the work of our colleagues Jerry Beyer and Jeremy Cruz pushing beyond reconciliation towards things like reparations and ecclesial reparations, perhaps also in the area of social change, to be some things we could continue to talk about. Thanks very much.